There are two different places where we can input keynote information. The first place is in the object itself. We can see this by zooming in on a part of this wall, then selecting on the wall. Move your cursor over, then under Properties, select on Edit Type. In the Type Properties dialog box, down toward the bottom, you'll see Keynote, and it currently reads W5. This is the keynote that will display if we would keynote this wall. If we would click inside of the box, we could then type in whatever keynote we wanted to display, and then that information would also show up in the keynote. But there is another place where we can input in this keynote information and have it display when we place that keynote tag. We can see that over here toward the right-hand side by clicking on this little box. By selecting that, we can see that we have a keynote list. And under the keynote list, we have keynote values and keynote text. And by clicking on the plus signs, we can then expand out each of these categories that have different key values as well as different key text. If these categories, or if this information is not the way that you would like to see it formatted, we can modify this by going into a text file and modifying that text file and its information. We can find this text file by clicking on OK, OK, coming up to the Annotate tab, clicking on the word Keynote, then choosing Keynoting Settings. This brings up the Keynoting Settings dialog box. This is the file location where we can find that text file that controls the keynotes. To open it to see what it looks like inside, we can move our cursor over and select on Browse. This will bring up the location where our keynote files are located at. Right now we can see that currently we have Revit Keynotes Metric highlighted. But we could have Revit Keynotes Imperial or the Revit Keynotes Imperial 2004, and by selecting one of these, it would then use that keynote file, and we could choose whichever keynotes are defined inside of this file. To read these files, highlight where it has Revit Keynotes Imperial.txt, right-click, then go to Edit. This will open up your word processing program, whatever your default word processing program will be, so it's probably going to be Notepad. Inside of here, we can see a series of numbers over on the left-hand side. These numbers are the same numbers that we saw inside of that dialog box. This text immediately to the right of the numbers, this is also the same information that we saw over in the right-hand side of that dialog box, so all of the text. If we look underneath 01530, we can see that it has point A1 next to it, and this says temporary dust-proof partition. Then it has numbers next to it. This means that we have 0530.A1, and that will be the number that will show up over on the left-hand side. This is the text, but the 01500 is the category that this number and text will be underneath. Here we can find that category, the 01500, and it's called Temporary Facilities and Controls. And next to it is a 01000. If we look for 01000 here on the list, we can see that is Division 1 General Requirements. So these are different steps down to get to the uppermost division. You will notice that General Requirements does not have a number next to it. The reason is that it is not underneath another category. So the numbers to the right indicate the category that your general node information will be under. Let's take another look at this. If we close this down, where it has Revit Keynotes Imperial, highlight on that, then click on Open. It will say that it's loaded this keynote table successfully. And by the way, if we were in that text file and we had changed any of that information, then that's the information that would show up when we look at our next list. Come down here to OK. Now let's go through the process of placing a keynote. Come up here to Keynote and choose User Keynote off of the list. Pick the wall, click once, click again. This brings up that keynoting list. You'll notice there's the number, there's the text. Expand out the little plus. We can see the 01500, temporary facilities and controls. It has a plus next to it. Here's at 01530.A1, temporary dustproof partition. If we had changed this text in the previous text file, then it would have been updated and reorganized here underneath the keynotes. So you have two different ways that you can assign keynotes. One is by typing in the keynote information directly inside of the object. The other way is going into that text file, specifying the key value as well as the keynote text inside of the file. Then from that point on, you can use that keynote file from project to project, reusing the same keynotes and keeping those same keynote standards in place.